subtly conveying value, interpreting great books from around the world.
Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today's book interpretation for you is Did I Make You Look Stupid? Have you ever had such experiences? You clearly know more than others, yet somehow can't win arguments against them. You definitely recognize that person, but just can't recall their name. Or after a breakup, curling up on the sofa for days, doing nothing but wiping tears and snot, too listless to move. Why do such things happen? Today's book will tell you it's all because the brain is kinda dumb. Many believe the brain is smart and magical, a bridge connecting human experience to the unknown world. But the author, British neuroscientist Dean Burnett, argues while the brain is complex, puzzling, and fascinating, treating it as sacred and beyond criticism? That's just boring. The brain isn't always rational and orderly, so he wrote this book exposing its frequent blunders. Dean Burnett's also a stand-up comedian. So don't worry, this won't be dry or technical. He bridges neuroscience with daily life, making brain science fun to learn. We often say dumb things, do silly stuff, and wrestle with uncontrollable emotions. Because our brains aren't perfect. Mediocre IQ, questionable temperament, and occasional crashes. Today's interpretation explores these three flaws to reveal the brain's imperfections. First, why isn't the brain's intelligence that high? The first sign of low brain IQ? It can't recognize its own stupidity. Exhibit A. Smart people often lose arguments. Online or offline, many experience this. The other person knows less, yet you just can't out-argue them. Why does this happen? Blame our brains. Scientists ran an experiment. Subjects solved problems, then estimated their performance. The results showed a fascinating pattern. Low scores wildly overestimated their performance, way beyond reality. Meanwhile, top performers consistently underestimated how well they actually did. Researchers believe that this bias occurs because people with lower intelligence not only lack smarts, but also struggle to recognize their own shortcomings, since self-awareness is part of intelligence. Intelligence is funny to imagine. Simply put, dumb folks are too dumb to realize they're dumb. An unintelligent person can't truly grasp what being smart feels like. They only perceive the world through their own limited lens, assuming everyone else is similar to them. That's why we see so many people arguing fiercely and confidently about subjects they barely understand. Even when debating someone who's dedicated their life to that field. Conversely, truly intelligent people experience a parallel perception gap. If something seems easy to them, they assume it's equally simple for others. Thus, they consider their intelligence merely average, while less bright individuals often radiate overconfidence. Meanwhile, smart people tend toward self-doubt and over-reflection. No wonder they lose arguments more often. Scientists even named this phenomenon Dunning-Kruger effect, spelled DA for Dunning, Krugerur for Kruger. Kruger effect? The name honors the two researchers. Smart people may lose debates, but hey, they've got great memories. But even geniuses forget names sometimes. Proof the brain isn't that smart after all. Second flaw, our memory system is unreliable. Many think brains store memories like computers. Just file info in mental hard drives for easy retrieval. But human memory is far less dependable than silicon. You know that moment, seeing an old friend on the street, recognizing their face, remembering childhood slingshot adventures, but their name? Gone. They approach, call your name, extend a hand, and you're desperately blank. So mortifying. Why can we recognize faces instantly but blank on names? Shouldn't both be equally valid identifiers? When recognizing someone, isn't that information just as effective? To get to the bottom of this, we need to dive deep into how the brain handles memory. You've probably heard memory splits into short-term and long-term. Short-term lasts about a minute tops. Sometimes it's called working memory, while long-term sticks with you for life. Short-term memory is super short-lived and cramped. It handles what you're thinking right now, like your brain's RAM. Researchers reckon short-term memory can only juggle about 4 things at once. Say you're memorizing phone numbers. You'll only recall up to 4 max each time. If you've got more than that, your brain dumps the less important stuff to free up space for new things. If short-term memory doesn't make it to long-term before getting wiped, it's gone for good. Only info that lands in long-term memory can be pulled up anytime, still using the computer analogy. Long-term memory is like your brain's hard drive. So, how does our brain tackle remembering faces and names? First off, faces pack tons of info. Facial features, expressions, eye contact, lip movements, all core to how we communicate.
Oh, and our brains are hyper-tuned to spot faces. Just 3 dots and we see a whole face.
That's why viral pics pop up of faces on Mars or in clouds. For this reason, remembering faces is pretty easy for us. But names, what info do they even hold? They're just random sounds and syllables. No real pattern to them.
To link that random snippet to a detailed face, your only sure bet is repeating it over and over.
But there are exceptions. Super important or intense stuff can create vivid memories, cutting down on reps. Like, you won't forget your first crush's name, but your grade school seatmate? Maybe. Quirky names stick better than plain ones, too. All right, say the name and face are safely stored in long-term memory. You're only halfway there. The other half is successfully retrieving that information when needed. And unfortunately, this second half is incredibly difficult because the brain uses a dual-track retrieval system, familiarity and recollection. Familiarity is recognizing someone or thing without recalling specifics. Recollection means remembering the full context of the encounter. Using our computer analogy, familiarity is knowing the file exists on your hard drive, but not where. Recollection is opening and reading the entire document. This system has advantages. It instantly flags prior encounters without wasting mental energy. In harsh environments, familiar things pose no past threat, letting you focus energy on new dangers. Triggering recollection is far more complex than familiarity. Familiarity is subconscious intuition, lightning-fast recognition without details. So when an old classmate approaches, you instantly recognize them, but actually recalling who they are and your relationship, that's exponentially harder. Your brain must reactivate the neural pathways from when the memory formed. First, you recall slingshot adventures, then him sharing his dad's imported chocolate. Oh, right, you visited his riverside apartment, flooded with specific memories now. Ding, it hits you. Zhao Yifan. The name flashes like lightning in a dark sky. Scientists call this the recollection threshold, peak familiarity fully activating the original memory. But the target memory only activates when stimulation exceeds that threshold, meaning you need multiple familiar triggers to open that memory file. For our brains, this method proved evolutionarily advantageous.
But in modern society, it causes plenty of headaches.
Like recognizing someone's face, but drawing a blank on their name, forgetting why you entered a room the moment you step in, or desperately failing to recall lyrics you know by heart. This happens because your brain initially knows the familiar file exists in its mental hard drive. But with insufficient neural pathways activated, it never reaches that critical threshold. We've leaned on computer analogies for memory, but they're oversimplified. Brains work very differently. If brains were computers, they'd intelligently prioritize important memories.
Instead, brains file memories chaotically, like hunting through random drives and folders.
And it'll randomly open your most private or cringe folders. You know the ones. Sometimes this computer dislikes certain data and just rewrites it without permission. If this were your work computer, you'd have chucked it out the window by now. Yet, this is exactly how brains handle memory. No wonder memorizing vocabulary feels impossible.
We can compensate with intense focus, effort overcoming flaws.
But don't celebrate yet. Remember the brain's mediocre IQ.
Third flaw, terrible concentration.
You know, focused attention boosts efficiency. Well, achieving that focus, brutally hard.
Distractions ambush you constantly. Your mind drifts despite effort, sometimes missing what's right before you.
Why these struggles? Because attention management defies intuition. First, its capacity is severely limited. Picture multiple people talking over each other, each demanding your attention first. You can't process everyone at once, so you finally snap.
One at a time.
This perfectly demonstrates that attention has limits. Intrigued, setting up scientific scenario. Scientists had subjects wear headphones playing different recordings in each ear, then report what they heard. Most subjects could only accurately report what they heard in one ear. For the other ear, they might only catch the speaker's gender. Proof attention capacity is extremely limited, barely handling one audio stream. So where does this limited focus go? Well, when bombarded with sensory input, what does the brain prioritize? You've definitely been there. In a noisy classroom or party where everyone's talking, you're chatting with someone when suddenly another group mentions your name, instantly hijacking your attention, even if they're not talking to you. That's the cocktail party effect. Attention goes where the brain deems critical, sometimes against your will. Sounds like buzzing wires, flowing water, crackling fire, or fast movement grab focus because they signal danger. Ignoring these could be fatal, so even when cramming for exams or racing deadlines, a buzzing fly instantly steals your focus. This instinct was forged through eons of evolution. Sometimes you can't blame it too harshly. Staying alive comes before work or study, right? In short, our brains can seem pretty silly. If it were a person, you'd hardly call it smart. So we've covered why the brain isn't that intelligent. Next, let's explore why its personality isn't great either. The brain structures we now use for thinking, reasoning, and decision-making didn't exist millions of years ago. Back then, its core function was sheer survival, fending off disasters, predators, finding food. Thus, huge brain regions still handle basic physiological functions to sustain life. This region is called the reptilian brain. In contrast, the neocortex handles higher functions like consciousness and reasoning. The reptilian brain is ancient and rigid. The neocortex is adaptable and flexible. The conflict between these brain regions often creates chaos, making people seem irrational and volatile. That's why the brain appears to have a bad personality. Do you know the brain's strongest primal drives? One is fear, the other is the need to belong. Fear might be humanity's hardest emotion to shake and the least rational. Right now, what are you worrying about? Moving soon. Is everything packed? How's that project going? Will this month's bonus beat last month's?
Mom's nagging about marriage again. What was that sound? A rat.
Any moment of downtime instantly drowns you in worries big and small.
Because your brain obsessively scans for threats in your environment and thoughts. Problem is, everything looks threatening to it.
On humanity's treacherous evolutionary path, physical threats lurked everywhere, forcing brains into this habit. That danger-filled era is gone. We live in relative safety now. But our brains haven't updated. They worry about everything. What we listed is just the tip of the iceberg. Any potential negative outcome, however tiny, gets tagged as worth worrying over. Hence the explosion of various phobias. Social anxiety, a modern epidemic, is one prime example. Who hasn't felt social dread? Avoiding calls, dodging toasts, dreading presentations. Everyone experiences this anxiety to some degree. When social anxiety severely disrupts daily life, it becomes full-blown social phobia. The root is fearing negative reactions. Our brains use others to calibrate our worldview and self-worth. That's why others' approval feels critically important. On one hand, brains default to predicting negative outcomes. On the other, they crave social validation intensely. This collision creates social anxiety. Phone calls mean interacting without visual cues like facial expressions. That's why some people dread it, terrified of offending others, making public speaking even harder.
What if they hate my presentation? What if I stutter when nervous?
The brain uncontrollably imagines every scenario of receiving criticism and public humiliation, ultimately manifesting as anxiety. Those experiencing this fear often display avoidance, actively dodging triggering situations. This does preserve temporary peace of mind, but long-term, it fails to improve or eliminate the phobia. Whether fearing elevators or phone calls, the solution is repeated exposure to what scares you. When you repeatedly discover it's not that terrifying, the fear fades, and the need to belong is just as universal as fear. So equally universal. As said earlier, brains use others for calibration, meaning no one's truly an island. Humans are social animals. In harsh ancient times, leaving the group meant death. So we must find a tribe and belong. This tribe-seeking drive is etched deep in our DNA.
To achieve this, our brains evolved specific functions, like reading others' emotions and people-pleasing to avoid rejection and the death that once followed isolation.
Today, leaving groups isn't lethal. Introverts can thrive indoors for years, yet ancient tribal instincts persist. We still crave approval and belonging.
Even those claiming to reject societal norms form their own tribes.
Whether punks, goths, beatniks, or hippies, they all cluster. In fact, much of our brain is wired for social connection, and who we become is profoundly shaped by others. This creates oddities. Some exploit our tribal instincts to manipulate compliance, like the foot in the door technique, a incredibly effective method. What does that mean? A friend asks to borrow money for the bus, and you agree. Then he asks to borrow a bit more for a sandwich, and you agree again. Then he suggests going to a dessert shop for a drink, and you feel reluctant but somehow still agree. Finally, he asks to borrow money for a taxi because he missed the last bus, and you sigh but agree anyway. After all, you agreed to everything before. Does this sound familiar?
If he had asked up front to pay for dinner, dessert, and a taxi, you would have told him to get lost.
But when he makes requests, step by step, why is it so hard to refuse? Because by agreeing to the first request, you've unconsciously set up a helpful persona for yourself. Each subsequent request is a bit more demanding, but to maintain your persona and not disappoint, your tolerance increases step by step. Conversely, agreeing pushes your persona higher and higher. In the end, you're stuck on a moral high ground, unable to back down. At this point, you might agree to requests you'd never consider initially. And there's also the opposite approach called the door-in-the-face technique. A friend says he's moving soon and wants to store all his belongings at your place. It's too inconvenient, so you refuse. But later, he asks if he can borrow your car over the weekend to move the stuff elsewhere. This time, you agree immediately. Though lending the car is inconvenient too, it's better than the first request. If he had asked to borrow the car up front, you probably wouldn't have agreed. This door-in-the-face technique, also called the rejection then retreat approach, sounds like the rejecter is in control, but refusing makes you uncomfortable, so you tend to agree to smaller requests as compensation. And this behavior stems entirely from the brain's tendency to please others. By the way, breakups can be devastating. Essentially, it's also, due to the brain's tribal tendency. The end of an intimate relationship. Someone leaving means that the person who knew you most intimately declares they can no longer accept you. This is a massive blow to one's social identity. The deepest pain of heartbreak comes from this, and this pain is very real. Research shows relationship breakdowns activate the same brain regions that respond to physical pain. Oh, when people say love hurts, they're not exaggerating. Love causes genuine pain, at least to your brain. It's indistinguishable from physical injury. But here's the good news. Your brain still has the capacity to handle such blows, and eventually it recovers, though the process might be slow. Finally, let's explore what happens when the brain crashes. Depression, breakdowns, substance abuse, addiction, mental disorders abound, all stemming from brain malfunctions. Mental disorders are typically defined as patterns causing distress or impairing societal functioning. Some might ask, what defines normal anyway? Good question. The standard of normality isn't fixed. Thus, debates continue endlessly about what constitutes mental illness. For example, America classified homosexuality as a disorder until 1973, while China didn't remove it from diagnostic standards until 2001. Ultimately, though, mental disorders cause profound suffering to those experiencing them. Regardless of external standards, relieving this suffering is a practical necessity. Take depression, many think. Hasn't everyone felt down sometimes? Just tough it out, right? But actually, we often judge based solely on personal experience. which is kind of dumb. One of the brain's most habitual thought patterns. It automatically amplifies our own experiences while downplaying others' different realities. So, those never depressed struggle to understand sufferers' experiences. Depression is a real illness, debilitating like physical disease, whereas ordinary sadness isn't nearly as severe. At its worst, depressed individuals may see ending life as the only escape from pain. Broadly speaking, most depression stems from enduring life's repeated blows. There's a famous concept here, the downward spiral, where problems accumulate over time. Like losing a job is just soul-crushing. Then soon after, your partner leaves, followed by losing a loved one.
Then on the way back from the funeral, you get in a car crash. Blows just keep coming, non-stop.
Normally, our brains maintain happy states with default biases, like assuming the world's fair and bad things won't happen if we behave. But constant misfortune shatters these assumptions.
Facing worsening situations, the brain can't stay optimistic. It spirals into hopelessness.
So we withdraw, abandon hobbies, maybe turn to alcohol or drugs, which obviously backfires, making the brain pay later. This is the downward spiral depression traps people in. So what actually causes depression? Researchers found depressed people have low monoamine neurotransmitters, so replenishing them is key treatment. Brain regions like the anterior cingulate cortex and hypothalamic axis also malfunction, but these may be depression's effects, not causes. Our understanding remains incomplete. Research continues. Like depression, breakdowns and addiction often happen when situations overwhelm the brain, so it gives up and seeks numbness. If you relate to this, please seek help immediately. No hesitation. This isn't your fault. Blame our dumb brains. This is our brain, truly remarkable in many ways. But after this book, you'll see it's also kinda dumb. Its flaws profoundly shape everything we say, do, and feel. It's incredible humans achieve anything under such flawed command. But think deeper. These imperfections might be the brain's true magic, what makes us human rather than AI. If brains were always rational and never messed up, our world probably wouldn't be so vibrant and full of possibilities like today. Oh, we'd lose out on so much fun that way. So, yeah, from this angle, the brain being kind of dumb might actually be a good thing.
All right, did I make you cry from stupidity? That's all for this book interpretation. Notes are below the audio. Catch you next time.